past few centuries, the world experienced rapid exponential population growth. Globally, the world continues to see a rapid increase in the population. Now, this occurs through a birth rate above replacement level. That is, the number of births is more than the number needed to replace the current population, meaning the incoming generations are larger than the previous. However, when looking at specific countries, the more developed countries are experiencing birth rates below replacement level. Now, this is true for the US, whose birth rate was last reported at 1.7 in 2018, which is below the reported replacement level quoted to be 1.9 for 2018. You may be wondering why we are seeing this. Well, there's controversy as to what the explicit reasons are. Much of this debate includes the topics of personal reasons, the financial burden of child rearing, and environmental or political considerations. However, the general consensus is that lower mortality rates and the introduction of women's rights is the reason, because this led to the education of women, which led to more women choosing their career over childbearing. Regardless of why, with the birth rate below replacement level, what we see now is the situation is reversed and the incoming population now becomes smaller than the previous, meaning the number of people being born is not enough to replace the current population as the elderly die. Well, why do we care? Well, when the older population is much larger than the younger generations, we run into a series of problems as this has not been the norm for the transcending of society. The problems we will focus on are economical, environmental, and educational in terms of the U.S. specifically. From the economical perspective, pension retirement systems, like Social Security, rely on future generations to contribute taxes for the older generations. A decrease in the incoming population could result in a huge burden by either shrinking the amount of Social Security received for the older populations or increasing the tax significantly to maintain current figures, putting a burden on our future generations. The latter is the most likely because who tends to vote? The older generations, and it is commonly seen that these generations care less about the future as it is out of their scope and does not matter to them as much. With declining birth rates, society cannot sustain Social Security programs because they do not have enough workers to pay for the retirees. Likewise, lower population levels would lead to an overall lower GDP, a system used to quantify the economic growth the country is experiencing. This is because increased population expands production possibilities through a larger labor force, which increases productivity and therefore allows our society to grow in economic terms. Likewise, when the population begins to experience a decrease, the available labor force greatly shrinks and the production possibilities go down. This can be said through only if technology advancements do not increase to make up for the loss. Kevin Bryan explains this through illustrating. If you give one person a hammer and they can build, say, one staircase a day, and then you give two people a hammers and they can build two staircases by just performing exactly the same tasks, then you have a higher productivity. With a higher population, there is higher productivity, thus higher potential for economic growth. Likewise, if there are fewer workers coming into the population, there will be less productivity. Next, we have the environmental argument. A popular subject of the global argument is the environmental impact. Much of the argument is concerned with the rapidly rising population the world is experiencing as a whole. This seems to in turn suggest a decrease in the incoming population in order to combat these environmental problems. As we discussed, in order to see this, we would have to see a decrease in the birth rates until they are below replacement level, all things equal. If we were to see a decrease in the incoming population, then what would happen? Well, a lot of things, some of which we have discussed. But ultimately, lower birth rates would minimize the environmental problems, but not solve them. Another side to the environmental arguments made state that with an increasing population, our finite resources will run out. What is key here is the word finite. The resources being finite means that inevitably the continued use of them would eventually lead to their extinction. All things equal, the only impact increased population has on our finite resources is how soon they run out. For this reason, the depletion of our finite resources is not a population growth problem, but a resource input problem. Not to mention that the problem of our finite resources running out will still be a problem even if the population is not increasing. The solution to this may be found in alternative resources through innovation. Now, how might a smaller incoming population impact our educational system? we may see decreased enrollment and hopefully system improvements. But the educational argument is a bit more unclear. With a smaller incoming population, you are bound to see enrollment rates drop. Public funding for schools could be negatively affected by this. Moreover, if a significant drop in enrollment is seen, this could lead to the closure of schools, resulting in a displacement of students and a loss of jobs to teachers, faculty, and staff. The decline in the incoming population would be a huge shock to the educational system. Now that we've talked about all three sides, the question is now, how can we prevent these problems without facing the problems of increasing population? The solution: replacement level birth rates. Or more simply, a steady population with little to no growth or decline. The solution is a little bit more complicated. However, I hope by now that you understand why a decreasing population is not beneficial for society.